Democracy 2 is quite a hard game to make. I think I find it easier to make now, but I wasn't quite as experienced at making games when I did it, and it's a horrendously difficult thing to do from a technical point of view, but also from a design point of view, because there was no existing game like that that I knew of at the time, and I still would say that there isn't really a game like it. In terms of the user interface, you know, how do you represent governing a country when there's no 3D world to represent the country? How do you represent the voters and the connections that are implied between voters and groups of voters and policies and events and situations and your decisions? You know, how do you represent that graphically? There's no existing framework to look at. You can't look at this game and go, well, this game did it this way and that game did it the other way, and we can, you know, it had to be from kind of like base principles of what information do I need on the screen and how can I show those relationships. And that was the really hard thing. That's the thing possibly that I'm most proud of, is the way that a ridiculous amount of information in that game is conveyed, and very, very complex interrelationships are conveyed. But when you show people how that works, they pick it up really quickly. And that took a huge amount of fiddling to get that right. It could still be better. It's an old game now. But I am very pleased with the way that came together, because it's a really difficult thing to convey that amount of information to the player. I mean, if you think that an RTS game, there's lots of information to convey to the player. No, there isn't. There really isn't. Not in comparison with the ridiculous amount of kind of like stats and all the rest of it that you have in a game like Democracy 2. And yet you don't want to have the game look like and feel like a spreadsheet. It needs to feel like an organic thing, that you are in charge of all these competing different things. Effectively, I think that the game should feel like, and does feel like, you're spinning lots of plates. You know, you're trying to keep lots of things under control at once, and I needed a user interface that could convey that, so you could get an immediate impression of how good or bad things were in different areas, but let you drill down into whatever information you needed and find out everything. That's really hard. The technical design for the game is very unusual in that it's effectively a neural network, but it's not a neural network as used by games programmers normally, where they use this to kind of train AI, and it's not an off-the-shelf thing. It was coded from scratch by me, and it was based on this. This is a book by Steve Grand, who was the designer for a game called Creatures that had really excellent AI, and he wrote this book about his attempts to build a sentient monkey. Yeah, kind of strange. But anyway, in that book there's a really good explanation of kind of how your brain works, or how he assumes that your brain works, and how neurons connect to each other, and how the whole system comes together and makes decisions and stuff like that. And when I was reading that, I thought, that's fascinating, that's excellent. And it kind of occurred to me that that is also potentially the ultimate simulation engine for really complicated systems. And the way a country is run, and the way all the different elements of a country come together, an economy and all the voters, policies and everything, the way all of that stuff comes together to give you an ultimate output, which would be how educated are people in that country, or how happy they are, how wealthy they are, the GDP, the environment, stuff like that. It seems an impossible problem to simulate all of that stuff. But I thought that if you effectively did it with a neural network, that you could make the whole problem solvable in the same way. Just saying that is one thing, but programming it is another, and debugging it is another. It's a nightmare to debug this game, because everything is dependent on everything else, and there's only really one type of thing. It's a nightmare job to program it, which is probably why games aren't generally built like this. But I thought it was the only way in which you could really represent all the information that I wanted to put in the game. It possibly seems like a bit of a strange topic, to do a PC game on, compared with, you know, gratuitous space battles and gratuitous tank battles, which are the games I'm kind of most popularly known for. But I actually think it's a game with a lot of widespread appeal. If you think about it, everyone's got an opinion on one political issue or another, and all of the issues in the game, people, you know, have strong opinions on. A lot of people know whether or not they want to bring back hanging, or ban firearms, or legalise firearms, or whether or not certain tax rates should go up or down, what they think about inheritance tax, what they think about petrol tax, what they think about renewable energy. Everyone's got opinions on this stuff, and you know, people love to be proved right, and they like to prove people who disagree with them wrong. That's the basis of the entire concept of an online forum, it would seem. So you know, people do seem to really love going in there thinking, right, I know how to run the country, and I will get it right, and everything will be fine. Just you watch. And it's kind of interesting that it never works out like that. It always descends into chaos. At least the first time you try it, because it's an incredibly complicated problem. It is quite an old game now, and it doesn't have a lot of the kind of sort of newer bits of polish to user interface that you would expect now. But I kind of think it doesn't matter, and it certainly sells really well. It sells amazingly well considering how old a game it is, and I think it's basically because there's no game like it. And unfortunately, it's a game that doesn't really look that appealing in screenshots. Even in video, it doesn't particularly look appealing. You have to sort of sit and play with it. You have to sit there and experiment and try and play the game. You have to really give it a try in order to get it, and people tend to get it quite quickly, which is good. It's not a sort of, you know, Dwarf Fortress kind of thing where it's going to take you days to know whether or not you're going to like it. You'll know fairly quickly once you actually start experimenting with it. And I think even if you think that politics isn't really your thing, you know, hardly anyone sane is really into politics, but you will have political opinions on everything in the game. So it is a game that tends to grab people, and they tend to get really invested in it, and they tend to get quite emotional about it when it's going wrong. It's not like just getting shot in a first-person shooter. It's kind of, no, everything has fallen apart and it's all down to me. That's generally how I feel when I'm playing it anyway.